Welcome to another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I am your host, Graham Hall, joined once again with my co-host, Zach Goodall, and we are here to break down and preview and predict Florida's first SEC contest of the 2025 season, Florida's first road trip of the 2025 season as well, after the Gators secured a victory over Long Island University in the season opener, followed by a disappointment in Week 2, an 18-16 loss to a USF team that will now go on the road and take on Florida's Week 4 opponent, the Miami Hurricanes. Zach, let's jump right into it. We've seen a lot of conversations surrounding Billy Napier, Florida's ability to turn this thing around, right the ship, a lot of early season panic. It has only been 2 weeks of the season, but people are kind of right back to where they were last year, feeling that Billy Napier may be in over his head in a sense as Florida's offensive play caller, that the Gators are not as good as many people projected them to be, despite all the returning talent on both sides of the ball, getting DJ Lagway back for his sophomore season. Obviously, we'll talk about Lagway here a little bit more in a bit. But Zach, let's just jump right into it. You've been watching the film from LSU's first 2 weeks. Obviously, the Tigers went on the road in the Battle of Death Valley, went to Clemson and got a victory there, and then had a pretty dominant win in Week 2. You've been watching the film, and if anyone wants more of Zach's thoughts, and I highly recommend you check them out, he's going to be doing a film breakdown of what he's seen from the Tigers throughout the first 2 weeks of the season. But Zach, let's start with the Tigers offense. I know a lot of people are familiar with the name Garrett Nussmeier. Certainly Florida fans are. The son of former Florida offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Doug Nussmeier. His younger brother, is also a promising 2027 quarterback that is committed to LSU. So certainly this looks like, a family affair kind of going on for a few years here with some familiarity on both sides, certainly. But it's not just Nussmeier, even though he was the SEC's most productive quarterback a year ago. Zach, from watching the LSU offense, what they've done well, maybe some areas in need of improvement for them, what stands out to you about the Tigers offense?
Yeah, when you look at the box score of this team, I don't think it necessarily stands out too greatly. Obviously a lower scoring contest against Clemson, but I think that was, to be expected, really, going up against a daunting defense like Clemson's. And even this Louisiana Tech game, people might have expected more, but I don't mean that to discredit what they've got going at the same time. Garrett Nussmeier is obviously an accomplished quarterback with plenty of experience. I think that he looks as though he's in total command of this offense. Like pre-snap, he doesn't flinch. He's able to get them assigned and make checks with quickness, with poise, and it doesn't seem as though he's making many incorrect judgments when he's on the field. He's accurate. He's got a solid arm. I don't think it's the biggest arm in the SEC, but it's one that gets the job done. And when I look back at the game last year against Florida, to me, I thought that he struggled with pressure and the ability to use his legs to get out of it. This year, at least, especially in the Clemson game, when you consider some of the edge rushers, defensive tackles, even linebackers shooting into the backfield, I thought he had a better feel for it and also was more willing to use his legs to extend plays, even if it's just to find his checkdowns. And he makes smart decisions with the ball. That's another thing that I think looks better compared to last year when he led the league in interceptions, interception rate, had a high turnover worthy throw rate. He looks like he's just generally playing smart football. He's got weapons to do it too. I mean, Aaron Anderson is one that certainly stands out on at wide receiver. The running game, kind of similar. The box score would suggest that it's not very good. Caden Durham, though, I think is someone that can make multiple defenders miss. I saw plenty of examples against Clemson where he made someone miss in the backfield and ended up making a positive gain out of it. He's got a lot of yards after contact this year. He's made several tacklers miss in both games. He's someone that if Florida's not on its P's and Q's on run defense, could make a player miss, and perhaps we see a similar result to the USF game with Byron Brown being as elusive as he was at making plays seemingly out of nothing. Where I have some concerns about the offense is their offensive line. I think they do a pretty solid job in pass protection, especially for there being 4 new players on it, having lost several players to the NFL draft last year in Will Campbell and Emory Jones, not to be confused with Florida's previous Emory Jones. But they hold up in pass protection well. I think that is more a sign of how athletic the line is, because it doesn't translate to power in the run game. That's why Caden Durham and the other LSU backs are getting hit in the backfield as much as they are, in my opinion. The line gets pushed back, and the running backs have to create for themselves. So it's going to be on Florida, especially, and I know we'll discuss this, but Caleb Banks' return to the defensive front to be gap and assignment sound, to penetrate and to make plays in the backfield, and ultimately not allow those to end in broken plays, to make sure that they get the job done when they get to the backfield, not only applying pressure, but finishing plays there.
Yeah, when I look at this LSU offense, we know that they had the number one transfer portal class and they added talent on both sides of the ball. They're loaded at the skill positions, but the absence of Trades, the sophomore tight end, and the offensive line still being kind of a work in progress for LSU. You go back to the last 5-6 years for the Tigers, they just really were known for their dominant offensive line play. And I just have questions if they're going to have that once again this season. But from the sound of things, it looks like they have the talent around the protection to make up for those right now. Nussmeier being a more mobile, experienced quarterback than maybe he was perceived to be in years past. Obviously, Caden Durham is one of the best backs in not just the SEC, but in my opinion, the entire nation. And then, guys like Nick Anderson, I think that are poised for a breakout game here sooner than later. So certainly a daunting team, absolutely, on offense. But you go back to a season ago, and I know that you have to put it behind you and move past, but Florida had so much success against that talented LSU offensive line a year ago where they sacked LSU's quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier, 7 times in that game, and were really just dominant in the second half as well, and were able to secure that 27-16 victory last season. Caleb Banks, his return is massive for Florida, just given that he had 2.5 sacks against the Tigers last year, had arguably his best performance of the year against LSU, had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder as well, because he said go back to that 2023 season that they were kind of calling him small and trash talking him a little bit, and he came into that game fired up. Now he's been on the mend. He's cleared to return. You and I had both heard that he potentially could have played last week against USF as well. So you think that this isn't a situation where the guy's being rushed back, and Florida's hoping to get Caleb Banks at his best along an interior of a defensive line that certainly needs to get more pressure, be better at filling gaps and stopping the run against a talented team. So I think that bodes really, really well for Florida. But being in a hostile environment, on the road, Baton Rouge, night game, first road trip, like I mentioned, that is going to be a tough experience for Florida. How they handle that environment, it remains to be seen. And this is an imposing team, absolutely. Brian Kelly is, a very accomplished head coach. He's been in the business for a long time. Billy Napier came out earlier this week and said that I've long been a fan of him. I've been familiar with him dating back to his time at Notre Dame. He's routinely expressed a positive opinion of him, understandably. And, some will call this rat poison, but Brian Kelly has gone out there and praised Billy Napier's way, saying he's doing it his own way. He's a really good football coach. I know a lot of Florida fans out there may disagree right now, but this is certainly a game with mutual respect between two teams that have been more than not a rivalry contest in the past 2 decades. A lot of close games in this series, and we'll see on Saturday if that is going to be the same. Obviously, Florida has their own things to work out on the offensive side of the ball. DJ Lagway missed several shots in the last game, continues to look like he needs to make strides from a mechanical, footwork, technique standpoint. Reading opposing defenses, certainly, it's a guy who missed a ton of practice time and is still getting the implemented improvements that he needs to make during the week ahead of each game. And so it figures that this will be another step forward for DJ Lagway, but this is a lot of talent on this LSU defense, including one player, Jack Pyburn, who drew the ire of a lot of Florida fans in the offseason. He figures to be a factor in this contest. Jakeem Jackson dealt with a grade 1 hamstring strain. Remember, he got injured at the beginning of last year for Florida, entered the transfer portal, and now is at LSU. Some familiarity there, as well as a coach with the Tigers in Corey Raymond, who was Florida's defensive backs coach upon Billy Napier's arrival here in Gainesville, and now finds himself back in Baton Rouge. Looking at LSU's defense, Zach, what stands out to you? What do they do well? And maybe what are some areas that the Gators could look to exploit on Saturday?
I mean, right now, there's not much in terms of areas that I think they're poised to exploit, at least. This is one of the best defenses in the SEC right now. And I know it's a 2-game sample size. Things can certainly change, but you have to consider, again, like who they did it against first. Clemson was expected to have one of the better offenses in the country with Cade Klubnik at quarterback. They made him look like a shell of the quarterback that he was at the end of last year. Over their 2 games, they have over 40 quarterback pressures so far, double-digit quarterback hits. They are applying pressure even against a good offensive line in Clemson's. And I will, I guess, give Florida fans a little bit of a, I don't know what the right word is. Bottom line, Jack Pyburn's not really been a factor in that. I think he has one of their 42 quarterback pressures so far. Where it's really coming from is Whit Weeks. I mean, he even coming from an off linebacker spot where they send these simulated pressures in blitz. They're getting a lot from there. They're getting a lot from their interior defensive line as well. They're making a quarterback's job difficult to do. And that pairs with the second best running defense in the SEC right now. And granted, I think that both teams they've faced have been in positions where they've needed to pass more. That contributes to it. But they're stifling against the run. They're hampering a quarterback back in the backfield and making things difficult for him. And listen, I hear Billy Napier. I hear him being encouraged by what DJ Lagway is doing in practice and continuing to get in rhythm. Part of my evaluation of DJ this year is exactly that he didn't get the practice opportunities he needed over the offseason, and now he's kind of being rushed into game form as a result of only going live 12 days before the season started. But to me, it still looks as though he's struggling with whether it's injury, whether it's the time he needed to develop with his mechanics in a non-game setting, that is just, it's hard to rush that. And as a result, it makes me fear for him in this environment. Like, I don't necessarily think he's going to come out and put out some fantastic game where he sheds these last 2 performances and looks like a different style of quarterback at this point. I would instead, if anything, expect more incremental progress. But will that be enough against this daunting front, a team that is also really sound in coverage so far? And what's most impressive to me is how this defense was rebuilt over the offseason, and it came together as quickly as it did. So maybe they've caught lightning in a bottle. Maybe that's only a matter of time before it takes a step back. But right now, you pair with how well they're playing and the concerns that Florida has offensively. I mean, Florida wants to lean on its running game. And again, this is one of the best rushing defenses in the SEC right now, one of the best in college football, quite frankly. So it's hard for me to bank on Florida turning the tide on that. Maybe I'll be surprised, but right now, to me, it's not a super favorable matchup.
Yeah, Florida clearly has to step up on offense against this LSU defense. It starts with the offensive line. We made so much about the return of 4 of 5 starters from last season's team, getting back more than 3,000 snaps from a year ago, having 3 redshirt seniors in Austin Barber, Jake Slaughter, Damian George Jr., and the improved depth that Florida feels that they have at the position. They're going to use Caden Jones. They're going to use Roderick Kearney. Both those guys played double-digit snaps against USF this past weekend. But they're going to have to protect not just the quarterback better, but guys in the open field. You know, Florida sits here having allowed 18 tackles for loss heading into this game. That's the worst in the SEC. That's 129th out of 136 Division I teams. It's pretty putrid right now. You have to be able to get guys in space and allow them to have a chance to get downfield and make a guy miss, especially if Florida is going to continue to throw into the flat, throw these bubble screens, and try and use the great athletes that they have, but give them a chance to make a play if that is what Florida continues to do. And then, Jaden Baugh as well, they're going to have to create running lanes for him. We asked Billy Napier about this throughout the week, about the running back rotation. Florida obviously is set in their 1 and 2 in Baugh and Jacoby Jackson. But it did kind of feel like Florida went away from Baugh too soon against USF. He comes out, has 5 carries for, I think, 51 yards, 52 yards in that first couple of, drives for Florida against the Bulls. And then you really saw the split lean more away from him. And then he didn't have as much success down the stretch as well. So Billy Napier kind of, he's not going to throw anyone under the bus. He came out and said there are other things people can do around Baugh. There are things that Baugh, a sophomore who still has a lot of room to grow, can continue to do as well, improve from a pass pro standpoint. And for DJ Lagway, he's going to have to use his athleticism if the pocket collapses to make plays with his legs, throw on the run, roll out to the right, make some off-platform throws, and be accurate. That is something that absolutely has been a question throughout the first 2 weeks. They missed plenty of opportunities against the Bulls there in the red zone, and certainly there in the end of the fourth quarter. It comes down to Lagway and the guys that he has at the skill positions making plays, and there's a very small margin for error in this contest. With all that said, Zach, when you look at this game, what does Florida have to do right? And they clearly have a lot to improve upon. I'm not saying that it's a one or two things necessarily, but what are some of the most important things that the Gators are going to have to do in this contest if they want to secure a ranked victory, the number 3 ranked team in the country on the road in Baton Rouge, the whole nation watching in a primetime game? What are the things that the Gators absolutely have to accomplish if they hope to get out of Baton Rouge with the upset victory?
Yeah, I want to start with, I don't want to put unfair expectations on DJ Lagway for the same things I've said throughout the season thus far. Is he looks like a quarterback who is playing A, without practice time this offseason, B, to me, only my opinion, still bothered by the injuries that he dealt with. In a vacuum, I think he needs to come out and play one of his best games and look like the quarterback that he was last year, not being afraid to test the deep ball and also simply being more accurate with it. Again, he was like one of the top 3, if not higher, deep, accurate quarterbacks in college football last year, and we certainly haven't seen that. If some way, you can snap your fingers and suddenly that changes, great. That aids Florida tremendously. But I don't want to put that expectation on him because right now I'm just not seeing anything that gives me the encouragement that he could just do that all of a sudden. So to me, it comes down to the trench play on both sides of the line. Offensive line needs to step up. And I do think that it's gotten hammered a bit more than deserved in some cases, but it can certainly do better on the right side. With the penalties last week, especially, they need to play clean football and neutralize this run defense and this pass rush that has both, again, been dominant for LSU, at least to the best of their ability. I think that would be critical for opening things up for the offense, which is otherwise, again, still struggling with where Lagway is at. And the play calling is something that Florida fans get on, but like even some of these screen concepts can work if the offensive line jailbreaks a bit better, gets out, helps with perimeter blocking, helps with the receivers that are out there trying to set up those kinds of plays. It needs to be the offensive line's best performance of the season, even looking forward, not knowing what's to come. I think that this is one of the most important games for that unit. Same thing on the defensive line. Bob Garrett Nussmeier appears better against pressure. Again, Florida just absolutely demolished what was a really good LSU offensive line last year, and I would argue that it's facing a better matchup this time. They have to finish plays in the backfield. They have to get Nussmeier off his spot and force him into some of the decisions that I would say he made more often last year than so far this year. They have to finish plays in the backfield with that talented trio of running backs to prevent them from shaking tackles and making something out of nothing. That's something I truly think that they won't get credit for because of what the box score says, but these running backs are capable of doing. I saw it enough against Clemson to make me think they certainly could do it against Florida's defense if they're not on their P's and Q's, not gap sound, not assignment sound. They need to ultimately get into the backfield quickly and then not allow running backs to get away from them. It's critical, again, both sides of the line. They've really got to come out and play their A game this week for Florida, I think, to stand a chance.
Not to take anything away from LSU whatsoever, but for me, it's what you said. It's the self-inflicted mistakes. It's the costly penalties. It's, the special teams miscue. We've seen those in arguably the first 2 games. Trace Mack goes 2 of 5 on kicks, leaves 9 points, off the board from, a field goal perspective. And then last week against USF, they have an errant snap that goes out of the end zone for a safety, 2 points in a game that's decided by 2 points. I think part of why Florida fans were so frustrated from that game against USF was that Florida really did everything they could to beat themselves. And not to take anything away from USF whatsoever, because they played a really, really good football game. But Florida made too many mistakes to really give themselves a fair chance in that game. They had to do so much else right because of the mistakes. And when you allow opportunities to slip by you, if you're making mistakes like that, you're more often than not going to come out of things on the wrong side of it. And Florida with the double-digit penalties after having no penalties against Long Island, having 11 penalties against USF, holding calls, the unsportsmanlike conduct, defensive pass interference on that final drive. You can't afford those type of mistakes against a team of LSU's caliber. So for me, the biggest thing is Florida just can't beat themselves. And if they do that and give themselves a fair chance and they look competitive, even if the Gators leave Baton Rouge with a defeat, people are, I think, going to feel a little bit better about the team's rate of implementing improvements and their competitive nature moving forward, knowing that they're not going to face some teams that are not as daunting as LSU moving forward. They're going to feel better about it. But so much of the frustration from the USF game was that it felt far too familiar. Special teams, self-inflicted penalties, wounds, whatever you want to call it. The Gators did not play a clean game. And in the SEC, you more often than not are going to have to be on your P's and Q's, like you said, to give yourself a chance week in and week out. And for Florida, they talked so much about avoiding penalties and mistakes. And for DJ Lagway, too, this is a guy who averaged around one interception every 22 throws last year as a freshman. So as impressive as he was downfield, like I mentioned, there are still some strides for him to make when it comes to reading defenses, making the right throw, not being overly confident sometimes that he can force a ball in there when it's double, if not triple coverage, just because of his arm strength and his confidence level. You have to take what the defense gives you, settle for the underneath throws. And if you do that and take care of the football, you're going to give yourself a chance rather than trying to just strike quickly and potentially turning the ball over at a costly time. So for Florida, again, nothing to take away from LSU or USF whatsoever, but it starts with them not beating themselves in this contest. Now, let's get into what a lot of people are looking to hear from us when it comes to how we think this matchup shakes out. Remember, we're going to have our predictions and some written content coming from how we see this game shaking out, including Tyler Harden, our recruiting reporter's insight and what he thinks from this game. Not trying to get on him whatsoever, Florida fans, but Tyler has a lot of experience around LSU. He just graduated from the university, now comes over covering recruiting for us here at Swamp247. So he may have some additional insight in this that I encourage you to check out Friday morning. We're recording this Thursday afternoon. So make sure you check out our written predictions and score predictions tomorrow because you'll also get his insight. But Zach, time to put you on the spot. How do you see this one shaking out in Death Valley at Tiger Stadium under the lights in Baton Rouge Saturday night?
Yeah, I think Florida fans can get a sense of where I'm going to be going with this one based off what I've said so far in the show. I've got LSU taking it by 2 scores. And I think it's more of a vintage, lower scoring game for this Florida team, for their opponent included. Like the defense does enough where it's more bend, don't break. I don't expect LSU to come out and hammer 35 plus points and score 5 touchdowns. I've got it 27-14. It comes down to really what I'm concerned about with Florida's offense to this point, what they put on tape, the inefficiencies, the penalties, play calling, DJ Lagway's lack of seemingly physical development this offseason, and what might be him being impacted by the injuries he dealt with, stacking up against an LSU defense that has shocked me, quite frankly. The way this defense looked at the end of last year, I struggle to believe sometimes throughout an offseason that you can just, even with some patchwork, like there's obviously the room to add several good transfers and that change your team. They did a lot of that. And to me, usually it takes some time for that to become cohesive. Some players hit, some don't. LSU's has hit. Again, through 2 games only. I understand that there are things that could change, and LA Tech is not necessarily the type of opponent that you want to base how well your defense is off of. Clemson is. And they came out and had a fantastic performance against Clemson in week 1. You put those 2 things together, and that just really scares me about what could happen for Florida's offense in this matchup. That goes without saying. It's being played on LSU's home turf, and Florida knows well how intimidating, even daunting that can be. So sorry to disappoint Florida fans. Before the season, I viewed this as a winnable game when you put it in a vacuum. If DJ Lagway and the offense had developed the way that people anticipated it to, and for the defense to pick up where it left off last year. I just haven't seen either of those things come to fruition at this point. And therefore, I'm flipping it. I think that LSU wins this rather handily.
Yeah, Zach going with 27-14, pretty similar score to the Florida LSU contest a year ago when Gators won 27-16 against that really, talented LSU team that was sitting around 20th in the AP poll, still had some long shot of making the college football playoff, and Florida pretty much erased that. I think it's going to be a little bit of a closer game, and I think it's going to be a little bit more high scoring than you do. And I think that two talented quarterbacks are going to put on a show on Saturday. I think Nussmeier and DJ Lagway are going to have success on the night. I think Florida's going to establish the run well. I think Lagway is going to hit some explosives down the sideline, and Florida's going to find the end zone. It's going to be very back and forth. But ultimately, there are just too many factors right now for me to sit here and predict Florida to come out of this game with an upset. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be decided in the fourth quarter. I think it's going to be a one-score game. But until I see Florida play a clean game and Lagway to make those strides that we have talked about here, and Florida to establish the run and get everyone involved and pressure Nussmeier and make the plays that they need to make and handle guys like Whitweek. So the list goes on and on and on. I'm not confident enough yet that the Gators are going to be able to do it. I went 35-31 LSU. Again, I think it's going to be a close game, but I think Florida's just going to let too many opportunities pass them by, whether they just have drives stall out or they have costly penalties. That is a huge thing in this contest. Lagway, he's still a young quarterback. He played at Mississippi State last year. He played at Tennessee last year. Obviously, he played at Florida State last year. So he knows how to handle road environments, but LSU is going to be rocking. This is going to be a raucous environment. I think they're going to rattle him early on in the contest. I think he'll settle in. He's a guy who just gets motivated by adversity. I think he's determined to have a better performance, but I don't think it's going to be a perfect performance like so many are expecting from him. I don't think he comes out and has, 350 plus yards through the air and carves up this talented LSU defense that you're talking about. It's going to be interesting to see the reaction if Florida falls in a one-score contest, because there's obviously no moral victories in college football, and you still got to put a loss in that column. But if the Gators look more competitive and play this LSU team on the road very close, I do still think that there are going to be people who feel better about the Gators' chances the rest of the way. And I know it's a daunting slate. LSU, Miami, Texas A&M on the road. That's easily a slate where Florida could go 0-4. And that would be obviously a catastrophe for Napier's chances of surviving the 2025 season. But if they look much more competent and capable this week, regardless of the outcome, there is going to be some more optimism in comparison to a game where Florida just consistently shot themselves in the foot, looked all out of sorts, looked undisciplined. If they can be disciplined and take advantage and they just get beat by a better team on the road in the first road game for a team with a lot of young guys making their first road appearance, their first SEC appearance, I do think that there's going to be more reason for optimism than there was a week ago. But for right now, I went 35-31 LSU. Like I said, I think it's going to be a bit of a high-scoring game in comparison to some of the predictions out there, and certainly your take as well, Zach. So like I said at the beginning of this, look for more on LSU coming from Zach over at Swamp247 later, and look for our written predictions over at Swamp247, as well as Glenn West of Go247's thoughts. I went behind enemy lines with him to get his take on LSU. So a lot of content on the Tigers coming in the next 48 plus hours before the Gators and Tigers meet in Baton Rouge under the lights. But for now, that's going to do it for us here at the Swamp247 Podcast. For Zach Goodall, I'm Graham Hall, and we'll see you next time.